I want to talk about whiskey, and in particularly whiskey, the whiskey ration for Civil War soldiers. Now, whiskey was the drink of choice for Civil War soldiers. The daily coffee ration was important, but in 1861 most men came to the war with an appetite for alcohol. American whiskey was and still is distilled from varieties of cereal grain mash, bourbon from at least 51% corn mash, malt whiskey from malted barley, rye from, rye, and again at least 51%. And then there's good old moonshine, the Mountain Dew, which is a clear, unaged whiskey made from at least 80% corn mash. Now, of course, that moonshine is not being purchased in bottles like bourbon or rye. It's coming from stills on family farms or hidden in hollers. And if there are two alcoholic drinks that define antebellum American society, it's hard cider, we can talk about that another day, and moonshine whiskey. Very common. So men from North and South both had a taste for whiskey. And when the American Civil War began, whiskey was a regular presence in civilian life and also still in the army itself. The daily whiskey ration dating back to Valley Forge, that cold winter of 1777, 1778, had been abolished in 1832. But officers could still order the issue of a special ration of liquor to relieve fatigue and in cases of exposure. The ration was one gill, which was unchanged since the Revolutionary War. In customary US units, that's 1/4 of a pint of liquor, or 4 ounces. 2 good bar measures. Not too shabby. So what does that look like? Well, no community violations for promotion of alcohol, please. So let's do this with tea. And behold, 4 ounces of Yorkshire brand tea. Definitely not Maker's Mark bourbon. Now imagine that as whiskey, and it would, as my grandmother would say, warm the cockles of your heart. Is 4 ounces enough to get a man roaring drunk? Well, no. Is it enough to relieve fatigue? Yeah. And that's why it was issued. The whiskey ration was not intended to give a soldier Dutch courage. It was not pour encourager. It was issued to tired, exhausted men to put a little warmth into their bellies. Now, I've talked a little bit in other videos about the coffee ration, how each Union soldier was entitled to 36 pounds of coffee per year, and how that's 1.5 ounces per man per day, so enough for 3 good cups of coffee. So imagine a cold winter's day, you're cutting firewood or hauling forage or standing sentry duty. A gill of whiskey, that 4 ounces, would be a welcome addition to a soldier's coffee ration. Were there ill effects from alcohol? Well, some. According to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and please do visit, it's in Frederick, Maryland, close to both Antietam, Gettysburg, and of course Monocacy. According to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, 4,625 soldiers were hospitalized or relieved from duty due to inebriation. So it's 4,625 soldiers from 2,128,948 men enlisted in the Union Army. As I noted earlier, men came to war with a taste for liquor, and consuming alcohol in civilian life was commonplace, and consuming alcohol in the army was commonplace. So a fuzzy head from a few draughts of whiskey would be cured by the traditional method of sleeping it off. It was not regarded as a disease, nor as an impediment to work. Not in civilian life, and that same attitude prevailed in the army. If a soldier had a little money, or his buddies could scrape together the price, there were opportunities to obtain additional alcohol in camp and in the city. And a drunk soldier would simply be left in camp to sober up. Sure, if he'd run his mouth or behaved like a fool, that might earn him extra duty the next day from the first sergeant. But a drunk man would rarely be sent to the regimental surgeon, and a regimental surgeon would only commit a seriously ill man to hospital. So we're talking about 4,625 men over 4 years of war out of over 2 million enlisted. So you can see being sent to hospital for being drunk was rare. And it was a time in which men drank daily, and sometimes men got drunk, and sometimes they slept that off. So if you and your buddies had killed a bottle of whiskey the night before, you'd wake up, you'd brew your first cup of coffee for the day, and you'd get on with your duty. And if it was a cold day and you had horses to care for, like I did this morning in the snow, or firewood to tote, or a couple of hours of sentry duty in the cold, well, there might be a 4-ounce whiskey ration waiting for you at the end of the day.